Good morning, everyone. How are you doing today? All righty then. Let's see. Let's make sure we stay on track and on the right page. Yes. Oh my gosh. All right. If this is the first time joining, good morning. My name is Patricia Hayes. I am an executive advisor, career empowerment coach, and authentic networking strategist. And what I do is I help professionals, executives, and entrepreneurs to effectively and purposefully uplevel their professional relationships and establish strong networking skills and strategies so that they can achieve their professional goals. And may be overly simplified, but very accurate, because the goal and the purpose is to always stay authentic with it, to be purposeful, and to stay aligned with your values. And so that is not something that often people stay in alignment with and consistent with when you're talking about networking, but that's what we do here. And I welcome you to our coffee time career chat. And today is the last Monday in January. And it would be very, very problematic for me if I did not make sure to address the issue and concept of mentorship during this month, because January has been designated as National Mentorship Month. So I, of course, have tons and tons of opinions on this, having been a mentee and having been a mentor throughout most of my life. And I find it to be an extremely valuable relationship, a very useful resource and tool, but one that is often misunderstood, that is misused. And it's something that we all need to just stay active about correcting and making sure that we as mentors and mentees, and bringing up the next level of mentees in our lives, that we make sure that they are aligned with where things need to be. All right. So as we're talking about that, and make sure, because we kind of forgot our banner today, is to make sure that we are clear about what the mentoring and mentee relationship really is. And we're going to talk about a little bit about that. And I invite you to check that out, because on my various socials, LinkedIn or whatever, probably my blog, I've done a post this week, today, about this very thing. And it's very personal. It tells some of my personal stories and perceptions about mentorship and experiences. And so you kind of get a little deeper look into what it is that I believe and how it came to be. So I invite you to go check that out. And don't forget to, click the link and get on the newsletter mailing list, right? So we got to make sure and put that out there. So as we're looking at today, if we're talking about these 4 strategies for effective mentorship, and I was, starting to talk about this in the context of, mentees and mentors. And we're still going to do that, but it's just easier to direct it in this one. And then I will, as we talk, flip it and tell you why this applies to mentees as well. So we're going to talk about 4 strategies. The first one is that in a mentor and mentee relationship, there must be give and take. Like, you must be willing to give and open to receiving. And what do I mean by giving? Well, there's always the obvious, right? You have to commit your time. You're also, committing to sharing resources and whatever that may look like. And so as a mentor, those are the things that people are always talking about. As a mentor, that you're making sure that you're willing to commit. But here's the thing. I have seen potentially strong mentor programs and relationships go downhill because the mentee was not committed. And that is problematic, because what happens is, if you've pulled someone in who's not experienced at being a mentor, so they're not necessarily used to it, they're just getting started, you will leave a sour taste in their mouths, and they'll be like, yeah, these young people or these people are not really committed, so this is a waste of my time. And that is the last thing you want for someone to feel. Now, I've had this happen to me several times in more recent years, unfortunately. And I was very surprised, and I still can't quit put my finger on it. And I think some of that comes down to being a mismatch, right? And when someone's not committed because they decide, oh, that person really doesn't have anything to, to offer me, then you just don't stay committed to working the relationship. Now, when you're inside a program, that's problematic, right? Because you're now giving the program a bad name. That's a whole other conversation I'm happy to have with people offline. However, here is the thing, especially if this is something that what you were referred to one-on-one, or that you came across, through some event or activity or something like that, is you have to give things a chance. And if you find that it is a mismatch, or that you are not willing to commit the time or the resources, that's on both ends, then be respectful and say it, right? And say, I'm so sorry, this doesn't seem like it's working out. And, I hope that I can stay, in touch, right? That is way better than just ghosting someone. And so while there's that piece of giving the time and resources, you also have to be open to receiving it. And this applies to both mentors and mentees again, right? But let's start with the mentee first, because that's the obvious, is the mentee is the one that seems to be, quote, receiving. And when you're doing that, here is the thing that I want you to make sure that you are aware of, which is that you have to be willing and open to receiving counsel, right? Now, here's the thing. You don't have to agree with everything that your mentor says to you. You don't have to agree with the approach or whatever. But what you do have to be open to is approaching things with a new mindset, with taking some credence and taking it with a box of salt if you need to, but being willing to listen. Because when we're willing to listen, you end up learning something every single time. Every single time. When you're open to listening to someone or something that is not necessarily how you would normally approach it or agree to, you learn something. You learn something about yourself. You may learn something about the subject matter or the experience, but be willing to learn. And that's really what you're talking about when I'm saying be open to receiving that counsel. And of course, being open to receiving resources, because again, they may not come in the manner or the fashion that you presume that it would. I have seen too many people blow off things because it didn't look like what they thought it would when it came their way. Big mistake. Big mistake, right? Because sometimes the greatest gifts come in the ugliest packages, or they come in unexpected packages. So just because something looks like it's wrapped up in a paper bag, let me tell you, I know how to wrap up some really great gifts in some paper, right? Tissue paper, whatever. So do not make wrong assumptions about how something comes to you that is a potential resource. We'll talk a little bit more about opportunities in just a second. Now, on the mentor side, this is a little bit of the surprising piece, is where people are like, well, I'm the mentor, so I'm not really the one that's going to be receiving anything. Not true. As a mentor, you can learn so much from your mentees, right? Whether it's something because there's a difference in generation, so maybe your mentee can help or expose you to something that you might not otherwise because of just the generational difference, or maybe it's an area of expertise or interest, whatever it may be. You as the mentor also must be open to receiving something from your mentee. Not a lot of people approach the relationship that way. And that is a mistake as well, because it doesn't matter how much experience you have as a mentor, how old you are, how long have you been in the business. you too can always learn something. And that's what you always have to remember. So you as well must be open to receiving new knowledge, new learning opportunities, and something else, even if it's from the process and growing and learning how to be a better leader, even in a small connected relationship. Okay, so that giving and receiving flows both ways. Okay, now I've got someone saying checking, making sure. Yes, this session is going to be recorded. So you will be able to check back with this almost immediately. It will get posted. So don't worry, you will be able to access it. Okay. All right. And so as we're moving along, then the next piece is to talk about, let's talk about the keeping an eye out for opportunities. This is super important. This is one of those things that people always presume to be, and sometimes not in the best way, right? Because that gets in that, y'all know how I feel about transactional networking, but that transactional piece where it's just like, okay, what can I get from this situation? But you definitely want to go deeper than that, because a mentorship is a relationship. It should be, right? And so it's not just what can I get from this person right now. Now, at some high levels, it could be, but that's only if that's exactly how it's structured to be. And even then, don't take that for granted, because the one piece of content that I did not mention yet is that trust is a two-way street, especially in a mentoring relationship. So you're building trust both as a mentor and as a mentee. And what you do not want to do is to break that trust along the way. And as you're growing, you're keeping eyes out for opportunities both as a mentor and as a mentee. As a mentor, you're generally probably have been sought out because of your position in your industry, your level of expertise, your years of experience, something like that, right? And so people are coming to you, or you're getting introduced to mentees because of the things that you can expose them to, and helping them to learn how to see and engage in valuable opportunities is absolutely a very important part of the mentorship relationship. What did I say? Because remember, I didn't just say giving them opportunities. It's also about helping them to learn to see the opportunities for themselves. This is so important, because it's that whole little saying, about how you can take someone and you can, teach them how to fish. You can go fish with them and do it for them, or you can teach them how, so that then they can know how to go get their own fish all the time. I'm sure I butchered that analogy, but you know what I'm talking about. And here is the thing. This is the same thing. Very much part of a mentoring relationship is not just giving new opportunities, but helping your mentee to learn how to see them, to know how to recognize them, to learn how to nurture them. So that if your relationship wanes, they still have a very valuable skill that they can use throughout their career. This is one of those things I talk about in that blog post that I mentioned, because this is something I absolutely learned from my mentors, right? About learning how to see things, learning how to pause and recognize a potential opportunity. And then this is the thing where you take it back to your mentor to discuss, hey, what do you think about this? I saw this. What are your thoughts on it? I mean, this went on for years for me. My mentor from college, who I still stay in touch with 30 years later, right? There was a time during my career, I was making yet another big move, and I reached out to her. She had moved from the state, and I reached out to her to get her input on it. And she, of course, gave me her input, told me what she thought. and then was like, why are you still in calling me for advice? I need to be calling you for advice at this point. And that made me laugh. But it also made me feel so great because it showed how the relationship had developed over the years, such that there was now an exchange. We were more on an equal footing, and it had never come to mind to me that she might be calling me for advice on some things. And she did from time to time. And so that's what a good, strong, healthy mentoring relationship can look like long term. Now, we'll talk about engaging for the long term in a second, but it's not limited to, oh well, gosh, I'm going to have a 30-year relationship. There's no guarantee of that, right? There's a lot that goes into the nurturing, that goes into staying in contact, to being able to grow as you both change and shift in your personal and professional lives, right? So all mentorship relationships are not going to do that. But that does not mean that someone won't still think of you 5-10 years down the road, and all of a sudden you get an email or a direct message saying, hey, Patricia, I saw this thing. I hope you're doing well. Saw this and wondered if you might be interested. Because guess what, y'all? That happens. Okay. So you want to be prepared for that to be a continuing flow. And here is the thing, because if you learn that as a mentee now, you will be and make a great mentor later and be able to share that with those who come to you later in your career. It's a wonderful, wonderful cycle that can begin with you. All right. So that's the second thing. The third thing is about sharing connections and relationships. And you will be like, well, we kind of talked about that a little bit when we were talking about being open to giving and receiving. No, this must stand alone, because this is one of those pieces that people really expect to be a part of a mentoring relationship. So it's absolutely worthy of having a freestanding conversation about it and making sure to drive the point home. Because when you're sharing connections and relationships as a mentor, you do want to make sure that it's a relationship that is a potential, that's going to be beneficial to your mentee. And if your mentee doesn't see that you explain why, right? It doesn't have to be some long, drawn out explanation or anything like that. It could just say, hey, I think you should go contact this person because they have a background that you may not know about, but I know about, and they'll be great for you to go ask some questions of and maybe learn some more about them from that. Okay. That's one of those things. So you want to do that. You want to make sure that as you're sharing connections and relationships, that you're not connecting them up with someone who's not going to be good for them, or may not be a good fit for them right there at that time, right? Anyone who knows me knows I am extremely, extremely protective of my professional network. And there are times when I have to go in and I have to weed some people out because there are folks who are being abusive, who are being solely transactional. They're only coming to see what they can get. And I don't do that, right? Like, that's not how I operate. And so I am very, very protective of that. And when I have shared my connections or relationships with my mentees over the years, I make it clear to them my expectations for engaging with those people in my networking circles, right? And I think that's something that a lot of mentors fail to do. And so when a mentee crosses the line in some way, and they get upset with them and they're like, no, we can't do this anymore. Well, sometimes the mentor has to take responsibility for that, because maybe they did not set clear boundaries as far as what their expectations were when they brought you in and said, I'm going to share you with my network. Okay. So again, years down the road, my mentor is gone. I'm making another big shift. But I need to talk to some people who are here locally. And so when I was going to reach out to a couple of people that were close to my mentor, but I knew because of her, I called her still to say, hey, what do you think about me reaching out to this person? Right. And she was like, oh, yeah, absolutely no problem. Because the last thing I wanted was for this person to come back and say, hey, I talked to Patricia, and her like, her being, well, she never even told me that was going on. So what's going on with that? Right. But okay, but that's I just described, we had a decades long relationship. Right. So I don't want any surprises with that. Now, that said, there are times when you may have to reach out to someone before you can go back to your mentor, but always make sure that you do that check in. Okay. You don't ever, as a mentee, want it looking like you're circumventing your mentor, that you're undermining them in some way. That's just not that. That is not a good way to start or to further your professional career. And if you get away with it once, trust me, it will not continue because you'll get a bad reputation. People talk behind closed doors and you would be surprised. Okay. So, and it doesn't take a lot of words either. But when you are a good mentee, let's talk about what happens when you are a good mentee. When you do the work that you're asked, let's say if you're in it as an intern, or you are following up on the advice, or you're showing that you're actually listening and engaging with the content, the resources, or whatever that your mentor is sharing with you. Let me tell you what it looks like when you do what you're supposed to be doing as a mentee, right? Respecting relationships, respecting boundaries, right? Engaging. When I was, law school, coming out of law school, my last semester of law school, I actually worked in the Texas legislature here as a full-time externship, right? That's a fancy word for I'm still working and not getting paid. I was paying them because I was getting academic credit for it in my third year, second semester of law school. And I got assigned to a woman in the legislature through the office that I was working for. And, she didn't get to pick me. And I was well aware of that. Like, I got assigned to her. And so knowing that that's how that went down, I was very mindful of being very respectful of her work, of taking her advice, of listening and engaging, and all of that during this. It was a fabulous experience that I had. And as things grew along and that trust built, because remember what I said about that trust being a two-way street. So as I continued to do the work, to engage, to show her that, hey, I'm really here to learn and to learn well so that I can move forward, she began to trust me more and continue to open up resources, to make recommendations of things for me to do and all of that. And by the time we got to the end of that semester, because I was raised right, I made sure to say thank you. And I said thank you in a handwritten note. I sent her flowers. I did all of those things, not just as a kiss up, but I truly appreciate it because I knew, again, she did not get to choose me. I was assigned to her. And she continued to work and began to trust me. And as that happened, and when I did that, she literally came back to me so thankful and grateful for me being a good mentee that she said, here are my contacts. You are free to reach out to whoever you want and tell them I sent you. True story. True story, right? That is what can happen when you are a good mentee and when you train your mentees to be good, strong professionals. All right. They will build a pathway, they will create a pathway for more people to come through so that more people will be willing to serve as mentors. Okay. So just remember that sharing those connections and relationships are a crucial part of the relationship. And as a mentor, you want to make sure that you are connecting your mentee with the right people, making sure it's a good fit, that you're listening to what it is that they say that they want. And if you don't understand, to ask them. And as a mentee, to make sure you're mindful of respecting those relationships, of being mindful of the boundaries that may be set, and that you're representing your mentor well. Because that's one thing I always told my mentees, especially when I was in the legislative arena, is if I'm sending you over here and I'm giving you my word, these people are accepting you on my word. Do not disappoint, because you won't have to worry about them getting after you. You're going to have to be worried about me. All right. So those are the types of things. So that's the third thing. The fourth thing and final strategy is a willingness to engage long term. This is the piece where people fall down, I would probably say the most, because they think that the mentor mentee relationship is for the term of that internship, right? Or because they connected you and it's only going to be a couple of months, 2 or 3 months, and then that's it. Big mistake. All right. And here's the reason why. As you grow as a professional, this is the mentor or the mentee, and especially if you are in the same industry, you are going to continue to cross paths down through the years. Not 1 year or 2 year, potentially 5 or 10 years later. It's so hilarious. One of my first bosses, I don't know what we were at. We were at some event or something like that. And I was speaking, or there was a note being written up about me or something. And they were referring to me what's the word? They were referring to me as being, uh, this is not the right word, but basically long-term expert in my field, right? And my old boss was like, my goodness, well, if you're the long-term expert now, then what am I, ancient? And it was hilarious, right? And we just laughed about it. But it's so true, because who would have thought that so many years later, we're still engaging in the same field and same industry. And people know where I've worked, and he can take credit for some of those things, right? Hopefully all the great things. But to acknowledge that, yeah, that person came through my training, and you want them to be willing to claim you. Let's be honest. You want people to be able to say, hey, how was it working with Patricia? You're like, you know what? She's great. We did this. She was a great learner. She took instruction well, whatever it may be. Right? You don't want it to be, oh, well, it was fine. That's code and for red flag, like there's a problem somewhere, right? And that causes people to dig a little. Now, not getting into that, that's also that piece of taking things with a grain of salt, and so that people can learn. But you don't want to put people in the position of not being able to speak well of you years down the road. Okay. And as a mentor and as a mentee, because I know some people who've worked for certain legislative members who could never say publicly what that relationship was like, but behind very closed doors were like, oh my God, it was like the worst experience of my life. And you're like, oh, what? And, because it looks so great on the surface, right? Now, there's a little bit of difference with that, especially because that's more of when those are employer-employee relationships. But here's the thing, those employer-employee relationships very often can also turn into mentor-mentee relationships and even sponsorships, which we're not even talking about here. A sponsor is when someone who takes you under their wing deliberately and are like, we're going to move you along this pathway to get you to a certain level, right? A mentor is not necessarily doing that. They may have some elements of that, but they're advising you. They're saying, hey, here's some things to think about as you're moving along the way. And one of the things that I'm always want to stress is that your mentor does not have to be in the same field as you. It is often presumed that they have to be that in order for the mentorship to work. That is not true, right? Because here's the thing, when you have a very strong professional network or you're growing one, you can mentor people who are not directly in your industry because you have connections that you can connect them with. You have relationships that you can join them with to make the mentorship relationship strong for them. Okay. And that as a mentee is really important. You want to look more at who your mentor is in a much bigger picture and not just what they do right then at the time that you meet them. That is a very limited purview. And you're doing yourself an injustice by limiting that viewpoint to just that. Because down the road, when you change careers a couple of times, that mentor could still be someone who is great to work with, to consult, to check back with. And this is how you can build and be willing to engage in long-term relationships that can, be beneficial on both sides for a long time to come. Every mentorship and mentor-mentee relationship is not necessarily going to turn into that. But what I want you to realize is that it could. And you want to make sure you're nurturing things so that even if it's not one and it naturally ends, that it naturally ends on a strong note, so that if you should cross paths again, or that person is recommend or comes back and needs something, whatever, you're still willing to step into that because you ended that relationship on a strong note. But even better is when you have that relationship and you recognize like this one's for the long term. Like this is one that's going to last for years to come. Okay. So that's what I have for you. Those 4 strategies for being for effective mentorship, which is including being willing to give and open to receiving, to try to remember that you want to keep your eyes open for opportunities that are appropriate and relevant. That you definitely want to share your connections and relationships, but making sure that you're establishing strong boundaries and expectations regarding that. And then finally, be willing to engage for the long term because you never know where that relationship can ultimately take you. And that is it. Let's see, try to make sure I don't have any more comments. There we go. Okay, so thank you guys so much for sticking it out with me. I hope that this has been helpful or useful to you. Please be willing and share this because I think it's really important for people who are looking to be better mentors as well as being a great mentee. But when you know what type of mentor you should be looking for and what to expect from them, okay? Let's connect up. Hit me up in the DMs if you want to chat some more, if you want to set up a consultation for, figuring out what your next move is professionally. I'm happy to have that conversation with you. All right. Take care, everyone. And I'll talk with you again soon. Bye-bye.